What the hell is up, everyone? My name is Jamie Logan, and today I am here with Paul from Magic Valley. This company is something that I think could be one of the only things that actually saves us. So, today we're going to talk all about cultivated meat, what it is, how it works, and when we should expect to see it on the supermarket shelves. Paul, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Jamie. Great to speak to you.
Of course, thanks for making the time. You're all the way across the world. So it's completely, I think it's nighttime there. It's very early here.
Yeah, I'm in Melbourne in Australia. It's actually midnight here.
Oh, wow. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing everything that you know with us because this is, I think, the future. And so, why don't you just break down what cultivated meat is for those people that may not know?
Sure. So cultivated meat is basically a real meat product, um, just developed in a more efficient, more humane, and more sustainable way. So basically, every company has a slightly different process, but describing our process, we basically take a sample of cells from a living animal, obviously goes on continue living its normal natural life, and for us that's just a skin scraping from the ear. Now we take those cells into the lab. We're then able to reprogram those cells into a stem cell, and we reprogram them into a particular type of stem cell, which is called an induced pluripotent stem cell. Now, that type of cell can become any cell or tissue type in the body. And so what we do then is we add some nutrients to those cells within the lab, so primarily glucose and amino acids. And everything that we add to the cells is either plant-based or synthetically derived. So there's absolutely no products of animal origin anywhere in the process. And so we add those nutrients to the cells. We grow them up primarily into muscle and fat at the moment, but we could grow up, as I said, any cell or tissue type. So you think what goes into a traditional meat product, there might be, connective tissue or bone, for example, blood, etc. But primarily muscle and fat at the moment. So we grow those up in what's called a bioreactor, which is just like really a large vat, has a little impeller in it that spins around. And the cells basically grow as spheroids. So they attach to themselves and they just grow up. And then we harvest those cells, combine them together to create a real meat product. As I said, primarily from muscle and fat. And at the moment, we're just creating mincemeat products, so what we would consider an unstructured product. So most of your listeners will probably be familiar with a ground meat product. We call it a mincemeat product here in Australia. But unlike a steak or a chop or a drumstick or something like that. So yeah, that's pretty much cultivated meat and how we do it.
It's so incredible. I mean, wow, just to think that this is the future. This is something that doesn't need to cause harm to any animals. And people who want to eat meat can still eat meat and enjoy it and not be responsible for killing and taking a life of another living being. So, that being said, how long does it usually take for those cells to be harvested? I know, I guess it depends on how big the bioreactor is. But can you give us like a general timeline of how things work?
Yeah, so you're right. It does depend on, the amount of cells that we start with, so that we basically seed into the bioreactor, and then how long we leave them in there for. So it's typically around 7 days. It can be up to 21 days, depending on the component. But yeah, but between 1 and 3 weeks basically, until we're ready to harvest, and yeah, good to go.
That's incredible. Wow. So, and it's only going to get faster. I mean, as these companies start to grow, because you're one of the, I guess, how many cultivated meat companies are out there?
Yeah, so there's quite a few now. I was thinking about this the other day, actually, in terms of end-to-end companies. There could be maybe 30 or 40 maybe across the world, something like that. And there's obviously other companies just fulfilling that make up the industry, but are fulfilling just one component of the industry. So they might be just making, media, what we add to the cells, or they're just making bioreactors, etc. But
Mm.
yeah, there's probably, I think, about 30 or 40 in total.
Amazing. And so, what would you say, Magic Valley, how are you guys different from some of the other cultivated meat companies that are out there?
Yeah, so we've probably got two key differentiators. One of them is in the technology that we use, so the type of stem cell that we use. A lot of companies use an older technology or a different type of stem cell that isn't as scalable and can't turn into any cell or tissue type other than the cell that it comes from. So if you take a muscle biopsy, it can only become muscle. If you take a fat biopsy, it can only become fat, etc. With our technology, it can become, as I said, any cell or tissue type. Our cells also multiply indefinitely as well. So we don't have to do anything to the cells to get them to continue multiplying. So our process is completely non-GMO, which some other companies have some issues with in trying to get that older technology or those different cell types to get those cells to continue to grow. And we also don't, as I mentioned, we don't use any animal products. So not only no animal products, but some people might be familiar with the term FBS, which stands for fetal bovine serum. And without getting into the gory details, the explanation or the definition of that is blood that's taken from the fetus of a pregnant cow when it's slaughtered in the animal agriculture process. And so, unfortunately, within the industry, there's a lot of companies still using that because it does get the cells to grow. That's what the cells would normally grow in, obviously, being blood and contains a lot of nutrients, but we don't use any of that. So we don't use that. We don't use, as I mentioned, any products of animal origin, obviously, aside from that initial cell scraping. So we think that's a really important differentiator for ourselves as well, which is not only a personal, stance that I take, but as an industry as a whole, we would love everyone else within the industry to get to that stage as well.
So there's some challenges obviously that come with creating a company in general, but you specifically have challenges faced with both vegans and non-vegans. Some vegans are saying, "Oh, well, I don't know if this is vegan enough. It's still an animal cell. I don't know if I would eat it." But then you have meat eaters that are saying, "Oh, well, it's grown in a lab, so I don't want to eat that." So what would you say to those people?
Yeah, great challenges that you pointed out. Yes, we do have both of those challenges. Look, I'm vegan myself. So let me start with that. Look, I'm not out there telling vegans that they need to eat this product. I'm just asking, people that are vegan to have an open mind to this product for people that want to eat meat, and really want to put it forward as a better solution to what's happening in industrialized animal agriculture today, and really to consider those two options and see which one they would prefer for people that want to eat meat. So if you're vegan or vegetarian and you don't want to try it, that's fine. Like you don't have to. No one's making you. But I'll just ask you to have an open mind. Having said that, a lot of people, and depending on the reason why they are vegan or vegetarian, they would like to eat a meat product. They like the taste, and they would love to, but they don't, whether it's for concern for animals or concern for the environment or sustainability, climate change, whatever their reason might be. And we feel like, a cultivated meat product would overcome a lot of those hurdles or objections. And so we think there will be some vegans and vegetarians that do want to try the product, which is great as well. On the other side of things, yes, as you mentioned, we get pushback more so on social media than anywhere else, of people that eat meat who don't want to consider it whatsoever. And look, we know there's going to be a proportion of people who will just flat out refuse to even acknowledge the product or acknowledge the benefits of the product or even consider the product. And again, that's fine. We can't. I'm not out here trying to force people to eat it. What I'm presenting really, or what we're presenting really, is what we think is a better option for meat eaters. So it's the same taste, it's the same flavor, it's the same texture, it's the same mouthfeel as the products that they're used to consuming. However, not only can we remove any ethical issues around slaughtering animals, but we can also create a much healthier product as well for the meat eating consumer. So we can create products that, for example, have a higher protein content or have less saturated fat, have more omega-3s, have additional vitamins and minerals. So we think the product itself stands alone as a superior product. At scale, we'll also be able to produce it much more cheaply than traditionally farmed meat products. And it's also better for the environment as well. So we use a lot less land, a lot less water, produce a lot less greenhouse gas emissions. And so for me, it really should become the obvious choice for people that want to eat meat. Most food products come out of a lab today. It's really no different. It's also the other things I should point out. There's no hormones involved. There's no antibiotics. It's created in a sterile environment. There's much lower risk of pathogens. So really, it really is just should really be just a superior meat product for people that want to eat meat.
Right. You mentioned pathogens and you mentioned hormones and all these chemicals. It's like people are actually ingesting that. You see people that have outbreaks of Campylobacter and Salmonella and all of these animal-borne pathogens and diseases, and it's like we can completely avoid that, which is so awesome. And I think for me personally, I think I would try it because I would want to know what I'm giving to people or telling people to eat, but I feel so good on a whole foods plant-based diet that like I don't know if my body needs it or I just don't I don't really miss meat at all. I barely even eat the mock meats because I'm like I've just learned to appreciate the taste of a Brussels sprout, you know? So it's yeah, but I think that this is so freaking awesome. And I think people also have to remember and keep in mind that this is not a new technology. People in hospitals have been using this technology for many years. Who first came up with the idea? Like, what is the history of cultivated meat? Do you know?
Yeah, great. It's a great question. And yes, you're right. The technology has been around for quite some time. Um, the person that's really considered, I guess, the godfather of cultivated meat is the father of who is now a friend of mine, Ira van Eelen, in the Netherlands, and her father Willem really came up with the ideas behind the technology and using the technology to create cultivated meat products, and that was and what he had developed was eventually passed on, and I think the patents and the technology were actually bought by Josh Tetrick at Good Meat now, and so that was many years ago. And I know Ira is a really strong proponent, of what her father had done back in the day, and to this day, really happy to see cultivated meat come into fruition. And then probably sort of in between those times, Dr. Mark Post in at Moser Meat created the first, I guess, most widespread and most widely known cultivated meat burger, which was basically 10 years to the day from now. So the technology has been around a while. As you said, it's been used quite extensively in the life sciences industry, and the technology is now really being adapted to create products for human consumption using basically the same methods.
So, what is the process of scaling this to the point where we can get it in supermarkets? I remember in one of our last conversations, you were saying you're working on getting it approved by Australia's FDA, or explain that process.
Yeah, sure. So they're probably two slightly separate issues. So scaling up and also regulatory approval. So yeah, the regulator here in Australia is Food Standards Australia New Zealand, which gets shortened to for SANS, which no one ever understands what you're saying when you say that. So I don't know why I mentioned that, but so yes, our regulator here. Look, yeah, basically, look, and in many jurisdictions, there's existing frameworks in place. Typically, cultivated meat is considered a novel food product, which basically just means a new food product that hasn't been approved previously. And you simply have to go through that process. And what that really entails is just a whole lot of safety data. Regulators want to make sure that the product is safe for consumption. It's not going to make people sick. Any of the components in it are safe, obviously. And in Australia, that's around a 12-month process, and we'll be looking to formally enter into that quite soon. And as you're probably well aware, and the listeners may be aware, that there are only 3 products approved for sale so far anywhere in the world, one in Singapore and 2 in the US. And the other question you asked is around scalability. So, a lot of that comes down, what we think is to the type of technology that companies are using, and actually how scalable that is. Because obviously, you've got to grow up the cells in large enough quantities, which means you've got to move into larger bioreactors, and find that maximum capacity, and then you need to scale out those bioreactors. So you need to have multiples of those. One of the interesting things, I guess, over the past, particularly the last 5 years, is the price of that equipment has really come down substantially. So, companies that may have been a few years ahead, paid really expensive prices for those pieces of equipment. Now the industry started to grow. There's become more players in the industry. The price of all those things has come down, and it really goes for everything within the cultivated meat industry, because it's been adopted from life sciences, typically, where you're only producing very small quantities, and they're typically quite large margins in terms of consumables and pieces of equipment and those sorts of things. Well, now there's a whole new industry that needs to mass produce, and so that cost curve has come down quite rapidly. So what really needs to happen now is there needs to be an adoption of the most scalable technologies, and there needs to be a little bit of infrastructure spend to get those facilities obviously up and running. Get the regulatory approvals is obviously the next step in between before you get to mainstream adoption. But there's certainly lots been happening, particularly in the last few years.
Yeah, because I mean, it's something that I've heard of and continue to hear of. I don't know if it's just because I'm in that world or in that space, but I'd also think there would be a lot of money that would have to go into marketing the product as well. Because to have consumers understand what this technology is, and to have them not like, the meat industry is probably already putting out some propaganda about how, oh, it's like lab this, lab that. Like,
Yes, that's definitely happening. But you're right. There's a really large education piece around it, because a lot of the people aren't even familiar with the term cultivated meat. And then
mhm.
you explain it a little bit, and you say, oh, you might have heard of it, called clean meat or lab grown meat, and they're like, oh, lab grown, yes, I've heard of that. And so then you have to, once they've got that understanding, then they'll be like, oh, you might get an ick reaction, or I'd never eat that sort of thing. But then when you want to explain the benefits of the product, how it's produced, the transparency in the process, which I think is really important for people, when they finally do sit down and actually thoughtfully think about where their food comes from.
Mhm.
I think that becomes really important to people. When you sit down and have a conversation with them about it. So that transparency piece is really important. You explain the benefits, you explain the health benefits, you explain the benefits to the environment, obviously the benefits to animals, and then you tell them that you'll be able to produce it more cheaply. Well, then people's attitude changes actually
Mhm.
really quickly. Even more so if you give them a taste. We're lucky enough to
Mhm.
be able to do tastings here in Australia. And people that were skeptics beforehand, even when you explain all those, the logical reasons for it, they're still skeptical. You finally give them a taste, and they're like, this doesn't taste any different. I couldn't tell any difference. And so that's the step that you get them over the line. So look, there is a huge marketing piece, there is a huge educational piece, and
Right.
look, it is a new technology. Anything new, is typically scary to people. Change is, hard and unfamiliar. Um, but when they get that familiar taste of the actual product, people tend to come around really quickly. So look, it is going to be a process, and it's not going to happen overnight. But I think it's a really important piece to the puzzle.
Well, you have a huge supporter and a huge fan in me, because it's the way when I deal with all the people on social media and they're commenting, "Oh, well, my body needs meat. My body needs nutrition." Then I'm like, "Okay, well, we're coming for you. We will have products that will be able to give you whatever quote unquote nutrition you need." I mean, I always ask people, I'm like, "Name one nutrient, or name one thing that you can't get from plants, from a whole foods plant-based diet," and they don't even know. They can't even name it. It's just like things that come out of their ass, and I'm like, all right, well, I can't help you there if you can't even like actually provide me with the science and facts that you're talking about. So we're dealing with people that have been brainwashed for many years.
Yeah, yeah.
So what is your personal connection to veganism, and how did you go and make the switch?
Great question. So I went vegetarian as a teenager, and I grew up just at home. Hardworking single mom. I spent a lot of time at home, by myself with our animals, and really just developed, a connection with animals who were my family, who were my friends. But was eating meat because that was how I was brought up. Like, obviously as a kid, you don't know any different. And then had a revelation one day when there was some food being prepared, and I'm like, hang on, this food that this it was meat, so this meat has come from an animal which is just like this animal that's sitting over here next to me. And at that point, I just immediately went, okay, no, well, this is no longer for me. And I clearly remember that incident, and it's funny because when I talk to other people have similar stories. There's typically like that turning point, just this isolated incident that just sticks with you forever. So at that point, I went, I gradually went vegetarian. And I was vegetarian for 20 years, and I thought, I don't eat meat. I'm doing enough. I'm not killing any animals. No animal is dying. I'm like, if I have an egg or if I have milk or that's the animal doesn't die for that, so I'm doing enough. Which was really ignorant, obviously, because then someone, it was actually my girlfriend at the time, who's no longer my girlfriend, happened to be vegan when I met her, and she's like, "Oh, do you know what happens in the egg and dairy industries?" And I'm like, "No, not intimately, not really." And she's like, "Well, why don't you just have a look at these videos and see what happens to male chicks, on the day or the day after that they're born, and why don't you have a look at the dairy industry and how milk's produced, and you soon see what happens to bobby calves and what actually happens in the dairy industry and how it operates." And so I immediately went vegan at that point. So a lot of people say to me like, "Oh, did you go, what was the process?" And I used to say like, "Oh no, I just switched like overnight. I just went vegetarian to vegan," but it actually took 20 years in between time. And so yeah, look, that was 10 years ago now, and best decision I ever made. And as many people say, I wish I had have made it sooner.
Yeah, it's super interesting because I have a similar story of when I made the connection to vegetarianism, and I was sitting in the car with my dog and there was a pig livestock truck that went by, and I just remember thinking, what's the difference between these two animals in any way that actually matters? My dog was so loved and cared for, and then these animals were headed to be killed and have their lives taken from them. So it was that like awakening, and then you think, as you said, you didn't know what happened to the egg and the dairy industries. And that's the thing. There's a reason they don't play this footage on the supermarket shelves, because they knew that if more people saw what actually goes on behind the scenes, that they would not want to buy them. So I guess my next question for you is, what is the next steps with Magic Valley? So you're going to get your certification, and then talk about the timeline scale of things, and then how people can help you specifically.
Yeah, sure. So the next two things for us, getting that regulatory approval, which will sort of be 12 to 18 months from now, which will sort of push us into early 2015, at least here in Australia anyway. And basically scaling up production. So we've produced prototypes for both a lamb and a pork product. We'll be looking at other species as well, particularly seafood really interests us for a number of reasons. So that's something that we'll be looking at next year. But getting regulatory approval for those earlier products, and then scaling up. So proving out, that we can produce, large quantities that will be able to, get to that mainstream adoption. And so they're really the next two key things for us. Outside of that, we'll be looking at the US as probably the next market for a couple of reasons. Obviously, there's been regulatory approvals already in the US, so the environment for that is really well set up. And obviously, the US is a huge market as well, whether that's from the commercial perspective or from just the amount of meat that's consumed, and so and obviously having the impact. So they're the next two things for us, as well as further product development. We'll start working probably in the next 2 years on those more structured products. So not just the ground meat products, but the more structured products as well, and really building out the team. So that's what we'll be looking at. For anyone that wants to help. I feel guilty saying this, but we're always raising money. So, it does cost money to do all these activities, and they're not super cheap. And we're obviously not revenue generating, so we don't have a product on the market. We're not a revenue generating business, as most companies in the space aren't either. And so, so always raising investment. That's one way. Spreading the message. So getting active on social media is really helpful as well. If the listeners or the viewers, want to follow us on social media, we put out a lot of content, particularly educational pieces, around the process, around what we're doing, and around the benefits.
Mm.
And it sounds silly, but really, liking, commenting, sharing on our content, really does obviously help with the algorithms, helps get the message out, and is really, it really does help supporters. So they're probably two ways that people could help out if they wanted to.
Great. No, definitely toss you guys a follow. Can you just actually spell and say the handle? Magic.
Yeah, so it's you caught me off guard there because our handle's different on
Different.
most channels, but unfortunately. But I think it's on Instagram. I think we're Magic Valley Food, and on or it might be Magic Valley Foods, and then on Twitter, because there's one less character, it's Magic Valley Food.
Okay.
LinkedIn, you can find us as Magic Valley. Same on Facebook.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, I should have been
No,
better
no, no.
prepared for that question.
I'll definitely link all of your social platforms below in the notes section. And another question that I had for you before we begin to wrap things up is we were talking about a few weeks ago how there's certain companies like Beyond Meat and Impossible Meat that use two different ways of marketing. So before they came to market, I think you had Impossible Foods that was like they were debuting at different restaurants or fast food chains. So people could go to like a fast food chain and try the Beyond Meat. I mean, the Impossible Meat. And then the Beyond Meat was different because you found it in supermarkets. Can you talk a little bit about that and why somebody would maybe want to go one way, run one route or the other?
In terms of the marketing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So look, I mean, there's a whole lot of different approaches. I know Beyond really relied heavily on influencers as well, and celebrity influencers in terms of building up that brand. Look, there's definitely two very distinct schools of thoughts in terms of do you start off small and through restaurants, or do you go through retail channels and look for that widespread adoption? Look, I think both have merit. We've been talking about this a lot ourselves lately as well. At least initially, like us and all the other cultivated meat companies, are going to be small scale. And so, at that smaller scale, it kind of makes sense that if you can only produce a smaller amount, then you might only just be in restaurants, or you might start off in food service channels.
Mm.
But once you reach scale, obviously to get that mainstream adoption, you'll be pushing out, wider through food service channels, and then obviously through retail and fast moving consumer goods, QSRs, quick service restaurants, and those sorts of things as well. So look, I think for us, it'll depend on scale, and how quickly we can scale up and produce enough, because certainly in the initial stages, demand is going to far outweigh the supply that's
Mm.
possible. So there's obviously, there's a couple of different approaches. It's a little way off for us, but we have been talking about it, and it will be interesting to see. Obviously in the US, there's two companies with approved products, and they're looking to get those sales up and happening now. So we'll just wait and see what they do, and we'll keep an eye on that as well, I think.
Because sometimes with these companies, you see a technology that looks like it's about to come to market, and then lo and behold, they go off the market for 10 years and then they come back. Why does that happen?
Huh. Yeah, great question. I'm not sure. Like I could only guess, and my guess would be, whether that's scalability, in
Mm.
terms of, we're able to develop the technology, but we can't get it to a scale where it's, either doable or whether it's commercially viable. So it might be too expensive once they get to that point, or they have to change something within that process, which means they've got to, maybe get some sort of re-regulation, or they have to use an ingredient, for example, that it's really expensive or can't work or won't work, or I mean, it really could be anything. And look, I am only guessing, but I think there are some potential hurdles around that. As we've seen. Already with the two companies that have the three cultivated meat products already, they're not mass producing. The first one was approved in Singapore about 3 years ago now, and it's still not, being widely produced and consumed. And obviously with the approvals in the US only recently, obviously sort of the last 6 months, they're not available in restaurants and in supermarkets and those sorts of things. I think it's only one or two restaurants at the moment. So so look, I think there's a rush to get those approvals and get those products regulated, but then manufacturing, product marketing, manufacturing, distribution, it's a whole different game. And so maybe that's why.
Right. Well, I really hope that things will start to speed up with cultivated meat, because I do think, every single day animals are losing their lives. And so, and in terms of, veganism in general, I do want people to understand that, like, we are vegan because we don't want to see animals be harmed, right? That's why I think we're vegan at our core. You could call yourself plant-based for the health aspect of things, but we're vegan because we don't want to see animals be harmed. And that is why this technology is so essential and so important, because we're giving people the option to eat meat without causing harm to animals. So that is such a win. And I think we need all the vegans to be on board and support this. You don't have to eat it, but at least to support the technology. So
absolutely. And
yeah, sorry.
no, I was just going to say, look, our support, particularly, locally in Australia, has been really strong from the vegan community, and it was something I was concerned about initially. Obviously, being vegan myself, and coming to them with this idea of cultivated meat. And it was a concern of mine in terms of how the community would react, but it's been overwhelmingly supportive, which has been amazing, and I hope that's the same in every geography across the world.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's only going to become something that's more known and widespread. And you know what? When you have somebody like, I guess, Kim Kardashian taking a bite into it, then you'll see more people start to eat it. That's just how our society works, unfortunately. Well, anyway, was there anything else that you wanted to add that we didn't get to touch on today?
No, not really. Look, yeah, as you said, it's really about, educating, and making sure that everyone, is familiar with the process and, how it all works and, what's involved and, what are the potential benefits. And, I think that's just the start of a conversation, really. And so, if we can get that message across, I think we're doing our job.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. Thanks for all you're doing. And guys, definitely go check out Magic Valley, check out Paul's work. And one of these days, we'll have to do a whole big taste testing here in New York. That would be so funny, like a big dinner party or something. Love it.
Absolutely. Can't wait.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much, guys. And until next time, I will see you around. Bye.